Guys, Coach Matrix here from my Performance Center, bringing another Whiteboard Wednesday. Today's topic, we're going to talk about hitting the basement, and what we're going to try to do is clear up a few squat depth disparities. Obviously, it always depends on context. What we're trying to do today is kind of clear it a little bit and talking about the depth of the squat, different types of squat, and what have you. A lot of times it comes down to a little bit of misunderstanding and a little bit of lack of education. So here we go. First disparity, are deep squats bad for the knees? To actually understand this one, we have to understand that squatting imposes two types of forces, both shear and compressive. So as you can see on the diagram to the left, we have the shear forces. Typically, it's with the femur and the tibia, or the thigh bone, the shin bone, going in opposing directions, right? As you can see on the diagram to the right, we have compressive force, which is obviously the load of gravity plus bar weight, and then of course the reactive ground forces opposing it. Now we want to know that shear and compressive forces are actually inversely related, and that a deep squat will actually result in less shear force, right? So again, it's kind of shear force that's the issue. So the deeper the squat, we find we have a greater load of compressive forces with less shear force, and of course vice versa. The greater amount of knee flexion means more compressive, less shear, and then with a quarter squat, for example, we have a higher degree of shear force with less compressive forces, right? So when we're talking about our deep squat bad for the knees, we kind of want to understand where the risk of injury occurs. So to kind of clear that up, we have proven evidence that a deeper squat does reduce shear force, and that of course the reduction of shear force means there's less unnecessary stress in our ligaments. So for example, as you can see in the diagram to the left, with a quarter squat, less knee flexion, this is the highest point of ACL and PCL stress in the ligaments. And of course, if we go to the diagram on the right here, we can see that the stress is drastically reduced with greater knee flexion. All right, so of course it all depends on the context. We are assuming that the athlete is technically proficient and has full range of motion, obviously. But if we are talking about two healthy athletes, both with full range of motion, we want to understand that a deeper squat actually reduces ligament stress due to the reduction in shear force. Disparity number two, do athletes need to squat to full depth? This is a yes and no. Now, we do have studies that have demonstrated that there are significant transferable improvements of power with quarter squats. So for example, they did a cycle of quarter squatting and they saw that there are great benefits in terms of vertical jump. However, we want to ensure that technically proficient deep squats will actually improve knee stability and ligament strength through hamstring and quadricep development. It really comes down to one of those use it or lose it type scenarios. If we have an athlete that can hit full range of motion with no issues, we want to make sure that we can actually make them technically proficient within that, so we can build strength and stability. Right? Again, if we can do so, we're going to create a more injury resilient athlete, which at the end of the day is what strength conditioning is all about. Right? So deep squats will improve and actually can maintain range of motion. That being said, science has also demonstrated that there is more ligament stress during less knee flexions. Although we're doing quarter squatting, for example, that is the point typically with less knee flexion that we're going to see a higher risk of injury, especially in stress on the ACL and PCL. Right now, obviously, contrary to that, athletes with any sort of poor technique will obviously be at a higher risk of injury with deeper squats, again, because we're bleeding out force. We're putting ourselves in a more vulnerable position, right? But at the end of the day, I'm going to say that the yes is greater than the no, because athletes who don't use it will lose it. This is especially true for range of motion, right? We see athletes that typically in jumping sports will suffer from like a jumper's knee, or have tight hips or poor ankle mobility, right? The less that we try to work on that range of motion, the harder it becomes to actually gain it back, and the ligaments, when taken through that range of motion, become lax. And that's where we're going to see injuries occur, right? When those athletes are put in that unsafe position because they've never been or trained in that range of motion before, that's where we're going to see the injuries occur, right? So in short, train as much range of motion as safe to do so in order to ensure our athletes build a resiliency to injury, because at the end of the day, that's what strength conditioning is all about, okay? And of course, athletes will still build strength and power when finishing a full range squat, right? We're still going through that quarter squat position, right? We're just going to take it to the basement and come back out of there. All right, so it's not like we're not benefiting or seeing transferable strength and power from a full range back squat. Obviously, we do see that, right? We just want to make sure that we are more technically proficient first, so our athletes can do it safely. And of course, there's many tools and what have we that we can kind of work on those things. So we want to make sure that we're actually working our athletes' limitations and utilizing tools to help build or maintain a range of motion. So for example, if we see athletes with poor ankle mobility or they have tighter hips, maybe we'll do something in our prep work to actually improve ankle mobility a little bit, whether it be banded ankle mobility. Typically we see our athletes or student athletes who sit a long period of time, right? Their glutes are always lengthened and their hips are always tight. So we'll try to make sure we're doing glute activation work and actually extending our hips a little bit to improve mobility work. And we'll use the tools and equipment available to us, right? We have box squats, or we can use different bars. So for example, if an athlete can only have a range of motion just about parallel, we'll set the box at that height and consistently work and work and work, and maybe we can go down a couple inches every week or every other week. Of course, we want to do a squat, but they have poor shoulder limitations. Of course, we can use a safety squat bar or a belt squat or what have you. So we want to make sure they're actually capitalizing the equipment available to us to kind of help and work those limitations and help our athletes build a strong full range of motion depth squat. Last disparity, people are asking, is it better to do front squats or back squats? I would say both. Of course, it always depends on context and making sure we're considering our athletes' limitations and their training abilities. The major difference, obviously, we can see the diagrams, is that a front squat is more front-loaded, and while a back squat is more centrally loaded. In this regard, a front squat may be considered more knee-dominant, where a back squat may be considered more hip-dominant. So we can see on the diagram to the left here, the athlete doing a back squat. You can see a couple things here, that the back angle is more horizontal. The hip moment arm, right, is greater than the knee moment arm. Again, we can load up this position a little more compared to a front squat. It really just depends on the context and the athlete's current abilities and if there's any limitations. Now, if we look to a front squat, again, we'll kind of notice a couple things. The back angle is a little more vertical because the bar is more front loaded. The hip moment arm is a little bit less when compared to the back squat, and obviously the knee moment arm is greater when compared to the back squat. Again, because we're shifting and tracking the knee forward more, we'll see this be a little more quad dominant, obviously. But again, both squats are beneficial. Just depends on the context of the situation and kind of what you want to train your athletes for, and what time of year it is, obviously, right? So front squat or back squat, I would say both, depending on context. As always, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@ironperformance.ca. You can follow us on social media on all the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Until next week, guys, we'll see you then.